So to start this introduction to animal and plant physiology, and before we describe what is the digestive system, let's take a closer look at chapter 25 describing physiology, and those are the key points. So it's pretty much the same system of organization that exists for all living organisms, especially when we talk about mammals. But we take the example of the human body as students can relate, and it makes it a little bit easier to memorize the different definitions that are going to be introduced. First of all, you need to know that anatomy is the study of those physical structures that are part of the organism. And we start here with the smallest unit of life, which is the cell. And cell can have many forms, and if you look here on the left side of your figure, you see that muscle cells or nerve cells are very different. No, cells that have the same function are going to be organized together to make what we call a tissue. Tissues are specialized cells that work together towards the same function. Now, when you take all those tissues together, you can have there the organ. Well, the organs are going to be, again, working towards a similar function, and you may have different type of tissues that make part of those organs. And finally, the higher level of organization within an organism is going to be what we call the organ system. Those are all the organs that are in place for some specific function. Here you have described the digestive system, which is the one we are going to use at the end of this lecture. And of course you have the mouth, and then you have the esophagus, then you have the stomach, and all of those are specific organs that all work together towards one same function, which is digestion. Another branch of biology is called physiology. This is the study of how things work within an organism. So we are going to look at and understand the organ system together and understand the cooperation that exists between them to accomplish basic tasks and fundamental vital tasks such as obtaining the energy from the food, reason why we eat, taking in the nutrients to be able to build up new molecules, and we're going to talk about anabolism and catabolism, and those are very important during growth and repair. But also one function important, of course, is to get rid of the waste out of the body. And looking at how organs are going to be working together, you need to understand that concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis is probably the most important fundamental description of how organisms are going to keep their body in balance, meaning that organisms' body are going to react when they can to try to make sure that the inside of the body is going to slightly change from the normal standard that they need to have to be able to live. The basic example we take, which is very easy to understand, is talking about the temperature, and this is here an example of thermoregulation. Thermo for temperature, regulation to regulate. And I really like this diagram where you see that person standing on that piece of wood that is on top of a triangle, where you see that you are going to try to maintain your body within a certain range of good balance. That means that the body cannot really accept large extremes, and we're going to do everything. This is what we call homeostasis. It is where we try to maintain a relatively stable internal environment. And you've experienced that when it's very cold, where we're going to do what? We're going to shiver to try to heat up our body. When it's very hot, you're in the summertime, you're right in a very hot place under the sun. What's going to happen? You're going to sweat. Well, sweating is a way our body is able to cool off the body. So let's just take a look at what happens when we are here responding to cold. So when the outside temperature is very cold, then the body needs to work to be able to maintain that not exactly constant but relatively constant internal temperature. So one of the things that are going to happen, number one, vasoconstriction, meaning that here the blood vessels that are at the periphery of the organism are going to just shrink in diameter, so decrease size in diameter. That's what we call vasoconstriction, meaning that in that way the blood flow is reduced, and that means that the heat loss is also limited. At the same time, obviously, the sweat glands are not going to be working. Going together is the shivering. Well, shivering is the contraction of those voluntary muscles, and when they contract, they are going to generate some friction, which is the creation of heat. So we also have the reverse in case of homeostasis for the thermoregulation. When it gets very hot, well, to prevent overheating, we're going to have vasodilation of those blood vessels, so that means more blood flow. And of course, we have the sweating glands that are going to act, and that's when we start sweating. This is what's going to cool the body by releasing the heat to the air. And it is at this level that we can introduce the famous feedback loops that exist. Two types of feedback loop, the positive and the negative feedback loop. This is going to be the pathway that exists that involve a sensory organ. So there is a sensor. Then that sensor is going to send information towards the control center that we have. This is here the hypothalamus in the brain. And then we are going to have effector cells, which are going to be the response given by the hypothalamus. So those effectors are going to actually themselves trigger the sensory organs to get the new information, send it back to the hypothalamus, and meaning that the effector cells are going to be re-regulated a second time. Now here you have that example. Red on the left is hot temperature, so it's too hot, the body is too hot. On the right is going to be too cold. Now what's going to happen is that when the temperature gets too high, as we explained, we are going to have vasodilation and sweating, meaning that that's going to generate a cooling of the body, and that cooling is going to be perceived by those sensors and sent back to the hypothalamus, so the body will stop doing that cooling effect. Of course, when the temperature is below the 37 degrees Celsius of the internal temperature, the reverse happens. The sensory organs are going to send information to the hypothalamus, and then we're going to have vasoconstriction, and eventually that's going to heat up the body and going back to a normal temperature when this is added of course with some shivering. Alright, now what is a negative feedback loop? It is when the output of the circuit is going to inhibit the input of the circuit, meaning that in that way you have a way to bring the system back to its set point. Now if we talk about a positive feedback, and it's weird, it's a difficult concept to understand, because when we think positive, you think it's good. Actually, in that case, think about positive like adding more and more and more and more, meaning that the system gets out of control and you're going to go to further increase of the input of the system. That can be out of control, that's the anaphylactic shock if you have some type of allergy, or that can be also something that we do want to have. For example, the classic example is a woman giving birth. Those contractions are going to themselves release more oxytocin, which are the one who generate more contraction, so that's more and more and more.